Good, it's you. How you doing? This is Chris, and welcome back to the Classic-Gaming Webcast. You hear boys with oddly effeminate voices declaring in some documentaries and pseudo-documentaries that the game E.T., the Extraterrestrial, which came out in late 1982 for the Atari VCS, later called the 2600, of course, to differentiate it from the new 5200, was the worst game ever made. And some merely claim that it was the worst game ever made for the console. Complete nonsense, all of it, of course. While E.T. might have been one of the worst movies ever made, the game's great, especially if you enjoy exploration adventures and you play game variation number 3 and you take the time to read the manual. Now, if you don't like that type of thing, thinking, fair enough, but simply not enjoying something is a far cry from stating with any validity that it's a bad game. I didn't even perceive a crash at the time. I'm convinced that that's a bit overstated these days, especially by people who weren't around back then. I was 11 in 1983, and all that happened was that I could get a lot of games for $2 a pop at the local Revco drugstore that I never would have been able to afford before that. It was a windfall, as far as I was concerned. It was an inevitable shakeout of the weaker companies and those who had gotten cynical and started releasing garbage. That's all. That's also what it was known as at the time, the big shakeout. A lot of us just added 8-bit computers to our fascinations, even with no diminished interest in consoles. I got a Commodore 64 in '84, for instance. Game playing didn't stop, folks, believe me. Anyway, if you really want to know what Atari's reputation never recovered from, it was Pac-Man to begin with. Right or wrong, a lot of players expected something that was more like the arcade game, especially given the great translations of Space Invaders, which I prefer to the original, to be honest, Asteroids, and Missile Command. I'm not sure if the great Berserk conversion came out before Pac-Man. I don't think it did. And the swine in charge of such things decided to be criminally cheap and give programmer Todd Fry only 4K to work with for his Pac-Man conversion, expecting a lot of people to buy the game simply because of the title, which of course happened. But kids aren't stupid. When we saw the 2600 version of Pac-Man, well, I, for one, realized that Atari was not above ripping people off after all. I mean, in '82, this was kind of like learning that Walt Disney liked to shoot deer or something. And poor Todd Fry also made one of the games in a series that was partially responsible as well for doing Atari in, the awful Sword Quest series. Each of the 3 games that ultimately came out wasn't so much an adventure game as a few crude rip-offs of existing games, tied together with corridor transitions in which nothing actually happened. It was like a really bad Gorf. And Todd Fry created the worst one, Sword Quest Fireworld, loaded with bugs and playing like a graphics chip crash. Fireworld, along with plenty of third-party games like King Kong, Picnic, Coconuts, and the entire K-Tel Xonox catalog, truly made people stop trusting in the purchases of games for the console. Now, why do I bring all this up? Especially considering that I've had a cartridge on the screen almost all this time that features a reproduction of the actual prototype artwork for a little-known Atari 2600 game, courtesy of Shy One from AtariAge.com, by the way. Well, Todd Fry finally managed to redeem himself with a terrific action game with some puzzly elements in it. And wouldn't you know it, the damn game never came out. At least not until the Flashback 2 pseudo-console appeared recently, but I don't have one of those things. I do, however, have the emulator file, or the binary image, as it's called, and I gotta tell you, Save Mary is one of the most fun 2600 games that I never played in the 80s. Now, if you decide to look for a ROM dump of this unreleased gem, you want to avoid this one. This is an incomplete version, and it's a bit graphically glitchy as well. The actual version of the prototype that I've been playing for a couple of years is this one, as it contains all of the power-ups, and in fact seems to be finished. At least as far into the game as I can play, which is pretty far. The pacing level by level, of the difficulty, and gradual appearances of new power-ups are all in place. Fry might have simply given up hope for the game's release when Atari dropped the 2600 in 1990. He's rumored to have worked on this game on and off for a couple of years, and later worked on another unreleased game, Shootin' Arcade, to be used with the light gun. Incidentally, Save Mary was a favorite of Atari founder Nolan Bushnell's, and he was going to release it through his Axlon company, distributed by Atari itself, of course, as the others were. Well, that never happened, and the game wasn't available at all until 8 prototype cartridges were found in '97 in the Atari warehouse that Best Electronics had acquired. From descriptions back then, I get the idea that they were incomplete versions of the game, or at least that some of them were. The one I'm about to show you might have surfaced later on. I don't know. I figured out how to play this with the help of one of the pages on Tempest's website, AtariProtos.com. So thanks, Matt. Yes, one of my favorite non-adventure style 2600 games just so happens to be a prototype. No matter, it's a great deal of fun. While one aspect of the game is Tetris-like, this is another game that's unique in its combination of elements, and it's very solid and meticulously done. The overall idea is very inventive, and in fact constructive, and I'll show you what I mean. As with us guys, there are intelligent women and not so intelligent women, and this dumb broad has decided to have a stroll at the bottom of a deep pit that's gradually filling with water. Maybe a piece of her jewelry fell into a sewage treatment plant. And you know how they can be with shiny things, so it's up to the player to drop a pile of bricks, one by one, into the water, so Mary can climb them and get high enough to be rescued. You might have been the unlucky devil on the construction crew who's hanging out in the crane on his lunch break. You are goofing off, so make yourself useful and rescue this chick. What you do is slide the arm of the crane, or the tram, or the giant fishing rod, whatever it is, back and forth along the top. Grabbing a brick from the left or right is your choice as they each scroll slowly onto the screen, and then dropping the brick into the water by finally releasing the fire button, or more frequently, dropping it on top of one of your prior bricks, being careful not to hit her with one, since it never occurs to her to get out of the way. In other words, your biggest challenge while attempting to save Mary is that Mary is a moron. But you have some control over her on occasion thanks to certain power-ups. Maybe the fact that her eyes are on opposite sides of her head makes it difficult for her to see. Now you can lower and raise the chain of your crane, or perhaps your fishing line, to a point. It can only go so low, explaining why you have to allow Mary to climb to an elevation at which you can haul her out of there. She'll climb upward every time you add a brick that makes the whole stack one level higher. So at least she knows to get away from the water whenever she has the chance. She cannot jump 2 platforms up at once, 2 levels up at once, you know? So another part of the challenge is making sure that they're stacked gradually, kind of like a staircase. And if there's a small enough gap between bricks on the same row, she'll hop over it as she scurries back and forth for no logical reason whatsoever. But swooping around and timing the platform dropping, sliding back up and across to grab another brick, it's all very smooth. It's like dancing for smart people. This graceful gameplay is of course partially contingent on the fact that you can move diagonally. In other words, extend or retract your line while simultaneously moving to the left or right. In addition to how much fun this game is, you also feel like you're really accomplishing something in that video gamey way. Maybe you were going fishing, then you realized, Crazy Mary's down there again. That's the thing, this lady just keeps jumping right back into the water after you rescue her every time. An insensitive sort might argue that after going back enough times, like a woman who's with an abusive man, it becomes partially her own fault. I think the real way to save Mary is to buy her tickets to another city, so she can't be tempted to hop right back into the water here. But never mind, we're the heroic types, ain't we, fellas? So out she'll come, funny eyes and all. We have to get her out of there before the water rises above her head, of course, and the risk versus reward thing definitely comes into play, especially as the water rises more quickly on later levels. because if you're the high scoring sort, you'll want to keep in mind that you get more bonus points after rescuing her for having more bricks down there. Kind of an odd way of rewarding the player. You had higher priorities than getting her out of there as quickly as possible. Great job. But there you go. And this is, of course, in addition to the normal points you've gotten whenever a brick has landed intact during the wave itself. I mention intact bricks because if you drop one too far over to the left or right, or try to drop one on top of another without giving it enough space on the lower brick to land, then it doesn't survive. It disintegrates into the water. No wonder Mary doesn't even get the chance to swim. Dissolving bricks? This is highly polluted water. If you're not used to eyeballing it yet, you'll know when Mary's high enough to take hold of when you can't drop bricks anywhere on top without having them disintegrate. And if you've grabbed a brick that you realize you don't want, you can just deliberately drop it far to the left or right and get back to looking for the one you want. If you swing one into Mary, even while it's still at the end of your line, it has the same effect as dropping a brick onto her, or her running underneath the falling one. In other words, you might as well finish your lunch and get back to whatever you were doing, hoping nobody notices that you've just killed a semi-innocent woman. Now let's take a look at the power-ups. You can stop the water from rising momentarily if you manage to grab this massive drain plug before it disappears, which can happen almost immediately. As with any of the extra things, if the timing is unfortunate and a new brick is just scrolling onto the screen from the same side. This might have been a minor glitch that would have been corrected during the final fine-tuning. As with any power-up, you have to deposit the giant plug on the cliff above. Drop it anywhere else and it doesn't count. But I guess the giant plug only holds for so long, as the water starts rising again 10 or 15 seconds later. It's a spot-on power-up, though. It really helps when the game has gotten harder, i.e. the water is rising faster, and you have some close calls. Or Mary does, anyway. You're safely at the top somewhere. The gradual increase in difficulty is extremely well-paced, so a lot of fine-tuning was already done before this version of the cartridge was burnt. The red octagon, which of course is supposed to be a stop sign, will magically keep Mary from running back and forth on her current platform. She will still climb higher if given the opportunity, but being able to stop her horizontal movement, this is another superb extra to have thrown into the game, because it makes the lining up of bricks before you drop them a lot easier, of course. Maybe she sees the bright visual signal out of one of her eyes. Shiny. And she gets the hint, until she starts panicking again a few seconds later. The numerals are mere score bonuses. And even if you care about that, believe me, you're always hoping for one of the other power-ups instead. I feel that this bonus item could have been left out entirely. Later in the game, after you've beat 4 waves, and therefore started again with the first type of brick, I guess this could be considered overall level 2. New power-ups are introduced, including the physics-defying golden mortar. I don't know what else to call it, as it's shaped like one of the bricks, except that it appears to be made of gold, and it allows you to drop them through Mary rather than onto her, which means you can stack them up without even caring where she is. And again, this lasts for only a precious few seconds, but it's a more crafty way in which you're made capable of getting out of last-second pinches if the water should be getting close to her head. And why what's essentially part of a building being dropped on her head doesn't kill her, but mere water does, is not something that Mary ever reveals, assuming she can say anything but help. Maybe since it's golden, it captures her attention, and she wanders in front of falling bricks to get a closer look. Shiny. Next time you go fishing from power lines, bring a megaphone, fella.
Quit jumping around down there. You want to get out or not? Just count yourself lucky that I took the bait off this hook.
Additional power-ups later on include an oil can, which makes your crane, or fishing reel, move faster for a bit, and an extra Mary. That's right, she's got several identical siblings, and if one shows up to watch her sister having all this trouble and doesn't bother to help, and you grab her and lift her to the higher ledge, you can alleviate your remorse for having let the currently trapped girl drown. Since you have a spare Mary, you just throw her into the water and then resume from there. In game parlance, of course, it's an extra life. Returning here to the very first Wave 2, if you know what I mean, you'll notice that the bricks are shaped differently during each wave. And this variety obviously adds a great deal of longevity to the game, as they fit together in less and less obvious ways, having started out as the very simple original bricks, and it becomes quite a puzzle, especially once you get to Wave 4, and all of them now exist at the same time, appearing at random. It really does get the old synapses firing fast. A new kind of brick is added here as well, a tiny narrow one. This does come in handy when you have gaps to fill, or when you want just one very narrow platform sticking up, so she cannot wander back and forth after she's climbed as high as she can get.
Can you, Mary?
I just had a thought that I find awful. Let me start this way. This game would never work on a modern console or computer. See, Mary here is pixelated. She doesn't look anywhere near real. Could you imagine this game with realistic graphics? Or even worse, if she were digitized, like from photos or a film or something? It would be a brutal game. It would be horrifying. I mean, you'd be under such tremendous pressure if any part of your brain thought this chick was real. And you would feel terrible if you accidentally dropped a brick on her, or let her drown, or she didn't make it somehow. That would probably traumatize you off gaming for, well, at least an hour. No, that would be absolutely horrible. It works because she doesn't look real. She doesn't even look real in a cartoon way here, right? The awful thought I had was kind of like, I think I'd care more if she were cute. But it was really, that was based on, I'm glad I don't care more, or this would be a very stressful game. It would hardly be a game at all. So anyway, as you know, I love it when twists are introduced after you've played for a while that simply but significantly change your approach to the game. And in addition to the new power-ups, a new obstacle appears during the third overall set of waves in the form of an airplane, piloted by what must be a terribly sadistic guy, as collision with the plane causes you to drop the brick you're currently dangling, assuming that you have one. Maybe the beneficiary of Mary's life insurance has a pilot's license.
Climb, Mary. Climb like the wind.
Or at least faster than the water. In order for me to help you, Mary,
You have to help yourself.
it's not pixel by pixel picky. A brick will nudge itself a bit to the left or right to line up with the uniform implied spaces below. Sometimes for better and sometimes for worse, but you can get stuck if you haven't left enough space on at least one placed brick to fit any new ones on top. So some foresight is required of the foreman. Of course, if it is a fishing line, it sure as hell is a strong one. Call the construction companies. I have a way to save them a lot of money.
Thank you for playing Save the Moron, TM, by Axlon. If you've enjoyed saving this moron, you may enjoy Defender, in which the people below don't even have the common sense to go inside. In spite of the fact that this is thankfully not a pixel by pixel prospect, there's a lot of leeway in terms of inventing your own structure, and I really dig that aspect. A lot of balancing was done, lending some credence to the story that Fry worked on this game on and off for 2 whole years, considering that you really are challenged, in spite of the fact that you're basically in control of where Mary goes. But I guess Mary Command wouldn't have been quite such an appealing title for some. Save Mary would have been a fantastic game, and now, thanks to post-Atari technology, it is one. Time for the bonus goofiness before we part for now. Well, we're already in the 2600 menu. Let me look for something I have limited or no experience with. Sorcerer. From the infamous Mythicon, which in '83 sold 3 games, I believe, at what were then bargain prices, about $10 a game, if memory serves. And it usually does, so there you go. Old This Is Chris here got a couple of them at KB Toys in the mid-'80s, and played each of them maybe twice. So this should be interesting, because I hardly remember, if that gives you any idea. As I recall, it was more interesting to look at the pretty pictures on the cartridges themselves than to play the actual games. Yes. You grab this pancake. Well, I guess it's supposed to be your magic carpet or something. And then it's a screen by screen shoot 'em up with one enemy at a time. Oh, and they turn into treasures when you shoot 'em. See, not much to remember in the first place. There's not even much substance to really criticize. These games almost don't even exist. They're almost zen over there at Mythicon. The only software company in history where, it would seem, the founder, designer, programmer, package illustrator, accountant, and janitor were all the same guy. See, you just fly across every screen, from left to right, and eventually you arrive back at the first screen. If you want to, you can just ignore the bad guys and keep the joystick held to the right. And then the object is just to move from playfield to playfield over and over again. It's like a primitive screensaver that has to be operated manually. The only groundbreaking feature seems to be the random music generator. Well, let's compare this with Mythicon's Firefly, shall we? Yeah, I wanted to see if I remembered right. It's the same game, except with different graphics plugged in. In that respect, it's like a lot of scrolling platform games from the 80s and 90s. You have to be lucky enough to rescue Mary the Lady Firefly, maybe, without touching that lunatic pixel that's zooming around her. Or, as in Sorcerer, you can just ignore it and move on. It's literally the same program with different graphics. And you even turn into the same horizontal dead guy when you get killed, even though you're supposed to be a bug in this game. Yeah, bug is right. But this is funny, let me show you. If you hold it diagonally upward after you die, you can keep moving. Until the program rouses itself from its Mythicon-induced stupor and realizes what's going on. Oh, you're falling. Okay, I gotcha. So not only are these games poorly conceived, but they're poorly coded as a bonus, and for no extra money. I know I'm being pretty harsh, but anything that cries cash in, whenever business decisions are made during the actual creation of a game or music, etc., it bugs me. It fireflies me. Good old Mythicon. Fitting name though. It's a myth that there's a real game inside the box. Well, now we gotta see what Star Fox is all about. It's not the dull wallpaper target shoot on later consoles. Have I ever played this one? Wow, it's not the same code. Mythicon is innovating. And it scrolls in both directions. Surely a revolutionary step, just before they went under. Oh yeah, you like individual pixels in this game. You grab them from the permanent dust storm down there as they move up and down very slowly, and you're doing this to make your character larger. No, wouldn't that be cool? Find your own pixels. A game by the janitor. No, I think it's just for points. But the catch is that you can't move to the left or right while you're down there. So you have to be quick to keep from being killed from above by this pumpkin. It's the great pumpkin, Charlie Brown. Ow! So, if you should ever get injured, or you keep eating fast food and TV dinners and you get really sick, and you wind up in the hospital, drugged up so much that you can hardly move, you'll still be able to play games. Just ask someone to bring over your Atari 2600, hook it up to the TV in the room, and plug in the Mythicon game. At least you'll be able to play something until you recuperate enough to move on to something more exciting, like Canyon Bomber. I love how the only indication that it's supposed to be scrolling is that dead tree sprite moving at the top, or the broken sailboat, maybe. Well, Defender it ain't. Unless any among you wish to defend Mythicon. For now, thank you for watching, and until a prototype reminiscent of Save Mary is found that lets me rescue something I can keep an eye on afterward, like Save Leftovers, this is Chris.
Hey, this is Chris++. I enjoy writing more, than filming or, narrating, anything like that. There is a multitude of articles, informative articles, we hope, funny ones, we hope, it's all free, on orphanedgames.com. They're not dots, damn it. I'm sticking to that. I know it's a lost battle. Humor me. Orphaned Computers and Game Systems was a newsletter, a paper newsletter Adam started in 94. And around 97, I started writing it with him. It became a website in 2000, and it's been going ever since. If you like classic video games, vintage, whatever you want to call them, I think you'll really enjoy the articles on our front page, so to speak. Simple as hell to navigate, nothing fancy. And toward the bottom of that front page is a link to a PDF. I wrote a book a few years back called a Classic-Gaming Bookcast. There's a free PDF. Because, we do this for our own enjoyment, but, there's that part of my brain that says, well, it's a shame all this effort that has gone into this website is just going to be for us. I mean, you got to enjoy the process of doing something creative, because that's what takes all the time, right? Rather than hurrying to get a finished product. I've always said, when it comes to, possibly lackluster or crude old games, especially unfamiliar ones, I always try to find the fun. Or at least the funny. None of these are reviews. I don't do reviews. One man's 10 is another man's 1, and vice versa. So-called critics are useless. Always have been, always will be. Nobody can tell you what your tastes are. It's impossible. Here, I'll meet you halfway. orphanedgames.com, alright? Thanks ahead of time for reading anything there. It's all free. This isn't that kind of plug. It's just fun to share this stuff. Talk to you next time.